Hey guys, this is Donna from Yoga in My School, and this is the Yoga in My School podcast. It's a delight to have you here, whether you're listening on your podcast service or you're watching on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm thrilled with our interviewee, our guest today, because I have followed her for quite a while, and it's a pleasure that she's allowed us into her world and into her life, and is going to give us some really great insights on sensory processing and yoga. But before we get to all of that, I just want to encourage you that if you are listening and you find value in what you hear today, please write a review or put some stars or that type of thing. It really is helpful to let us know how we're doing. And if you have suggestions for the show, you can always send me an email, donna@yogainmyschool.com. And I'm always happy to take suggestions for guests or topics that you're interested in. I've got like a whole bunch of people that I have on in my ideas, but those are my ideas. And so I always want to hear from you and things that are of interest to you and people who are doing really cool work, because there are amazing people out there in the kids yoga community, just changing the world left, right, and center. And I would love to share some sunshine with them and to highlight the work that they're doing. All right, so today we are looking at sensory processing for kids, and this is the book that has brought me to Britt Collins. I found this book on one of the publication places that I am a member of, because I bring in books and sell them, and I saw this and I went, oh, it looks so good. And then I bought it. And then I read it and I went, oh my goodness, it is so good. It is packed full with awesome ideas. And I've been a big fan of using yoga and mindfulness for sensory processing, and I've taught workshops on this for many years. I'm sure that there are a few listeners to some of those people who have been in those workshops over the years from here in Alberta at teachers' conventions and other such places and trainings with Yoga in My School. So thank you for listening, for continuing to be a part of our community. And we'd like to, turn the time over to Britt Collins-Feist. Hi, Britt. How's it going?
Hi, how are you? Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here today.
I'm glad you're here. And so you were just telling me that you're now located just outside of Memphis. Is that correct?
Yes, so we are from Colorado and we love Colorado, but my husband moved here for work and I had to follow him, but that's okay. I can work from anywhere. So we've been here almost 2 years now outside of Memphis, Tennessee, and we go back home to Colorado frequently to ski and see family.
I totally get it. Well, I'm looking outside at about 4 to 5 foot snowdrifts right now. So I'm a little envious that you're in Memphis.
I don't know. It's been rainy here. I think I'll take the snow over the rain, but who knows?
Yeah. Well, it's also minus 20 this morning. So yeah, no.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Welcome to the Great White North.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
All right. Tell our community of listeners a little bit about yourself and your background, and how you came to be interested in sensory integration.
Okay, so I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I've been an OT for over 15 years, and I grew up with a sister with special needs. So that's kind of how I really got into the field of being an OT. And I went to Colorado State for undergrad and grad school, and just have lived all over since then. And I've done work in hospitals and schools and sensory integration clinics. And I actually trained at the Star Center with Dr. Lucy Jane Miller, who's unbelievably phenomenal and such a leader in our field with OT and sensory processing. And I also am a feeding specialist. So I do a lot of feeding therapy and that kind of thing. And I've always enjoyed yoga myself. And so when I've did more things with yoga, and we're talking about how to really get, combinations of working with kids with yoga and showing that from like a sensory processing side of things, then my business partner and I, who we had written a couple of books already, and she was like, you should do a yoga one. So I actually did. The yoga book was just me, and then I had an illustrator. So it was my first book that I published underneath just my name, which was very exciting, big accomplishment. I was very excited about that.
All right. So yeah, like I said, this is how I was introduced to you and your work, as I saw this book and I went, what a great topic. Let's see what she has to say. But you do have a number of other books. You have sensory parenting for newborns and toddlers, and sensory parenting for the elementary years, right?
Yes. So this is actually one of them. This is the sensory parenting for newborns to toddlers book. And this kind of goes through like developmental stages and how to set up your nursery for your newborn to not be sensory overwhelming and that kind of thing. And then there's the elementary years too. So that kind of continues that sensory parenting of, what do you do when you have a fussy baby? How do you work on feeding with them? Because a lot of the times there's a ton of parenting books out there, but how do you look at it from like a sensory perspective? And so I co-authored that as the OT voice with my business partner, who's the mom voice. And it's really for any child. It's not just for kids with special needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have a children's book that I just published just last year, and it's called My Special Brother Bo. And this is kind of my voice growing up with a sibling with special needs. And so this is just a great book to read to your kiddos, especially if you have a kiddo with special needs in your house. So
Lovely. No, that's cool. As I researched before this interview, I was very intrigued with, as you say, this parenting from a sensory perspective, because I find for a lot of teachers, once I explain the sensory system is more than just the five senses, right? That there's the proprioceptive and vestibular and interoception and all those kind of things, and what that means, then they begin to understand why certain behaviors are coming up, and then how to address those behaviors in creative ways that work really well into their classroom. And so I can definitely see from a parenting perspective, understanding those whys, revolutionary.
I think it helps us to realize that usually there's some sort of reason why maybe a kiddo is having trouble regulating that central nervous system. So we're always trying to regulate ourselves. That if you get really stressed out, or you're very busy, or you've got like a deadline, your central nervous system is going to be in a heightened state of arousal. And it's just like a baby or a toddler or a 15-year-old. We all get into those areas where the external environment is overloading. Maybe it's really loud. Maybe it's really bright. Maybe we just have a lot of visual clutter in our field. And that can be overwhelming to where a kid can shut down, or a kid can spiral kind of out of control. I'm like that too. If I don't have organization or, kind of at least a schedule in my day a little bit. I mean, with kids, you're going to have to be flexible, but at the end of the day, I need things kind of calm and quiet after a busy day so that I can kind of regulate myself. Yoga is something that I try to do a lot of, and I use that with my own two kids too, because we're all trying to figure out, how do we function? How do we get into that best functional zone? And what tools can we use to do that?
Exactly. Perfect. Okay. So let's delve deep, especially for people who are kind of new to sensory processing and all those type of things. It might be review for some of our listeners who are like, yeah, I want more, but bear with us. We'll get to the more, promise. Yeah. But explain to us, okay, we know our five senses, right? Taste, touch, smell, hearing, sight. There we go. Five. What are the other ones? Because the other ones are really interesting.
I call these like the three hidden senses, because we don't always know about them until someone really kind of talks about it. And then you're like, oh, I get that. So the first I talk about is the vestibular system. So this is the fluid in your inner ear that helps govern your balance. It tells you whether you're right side up, upside down, how fast you're moving kind of in space. And this system is so affected by the way we move and the way we interact in our environment. So if you are a kiddo who is over responsive to the vestibular system, you may not like to be tossed in the air, or you may not like cars and kids that get sick in cars. You may not want to be on a swing. You're kind of over responsive to that movement, which means you have kind of like a low threshold, and any little bit of input is going to send you into an over response. Then you've got kids who are more like under responsive. It takes a lot of input to really wake their systems up. They're kind of sluggish and tired. And, a lot of times as therapists, we're trying to increase their ability to kind of interact with their environment. And then you've got kiddos who are like those cravers. They just want it. They want to spin and crash and jump and move and all of that kind of stuff too. And you want to give them a little bit of that, but you've got to counterbalance some of that movement with then what I call the proprioceptive system. So that second hidden sense is the proprioceptive system. This is input to your muscles and joints to tell your body where you are in space. It's how you know how to navigate kind of in the dark around your bed without running into it, which sometimes we do. It's how you know when you're in a classroom of kids, you got to move in between kids and desks to get up to the teacher to hand in your paper. In our body awareness, when we're little toddlers, they're figuring that out. They're falling and crashing and running into things and that kind of stuff. But that input to the body, that deep pressure combined with the movement, so vestibular and proprioceptive input combined together, tends to be calming and regulating for most kids. But you have to watch, because some kids, you let them kind of spin and you don't want them to just kind of spiral out of control, because that's going to actually get them too heightened. And then that third hidden sense is interoception. And this one is like a tricky one. It's really hard because you can't touch it. You can't, grab onto it like you can some of the other ones. But with interoception, it's that internal sense of, am I hungry? Am I full? Do I have to go to the bathroom? You've got kiddos who have trouble potty training later, than past kind of that typical age, might have some interoception challenges. Is it hot? Is it cold? Some kids will touch they'll turn on the water and they won't realize that they're burning themselves because they just don't register that temperature. So that's that interoception piece.
Well, and I find I work, pulling that back to the yoga world, I work tons with interoception, trying to teach people to pay attention to their bodies, even as adults, because even if we do have this sense and we kind of, I need to go pee, right? Or, hey, I'm hungry. We know that, but we sometimes distance ourselves through the busyness of our world, through the demands on our time, that kind of thing. And yoga and mindfulness practice, meditation, all those type of things help us to reconnect that dialogue between body and mind. And so it's like, how are you feeling? How about you check in? Just see.
Yeah. And teaching adults, that's hard. And then trying to teach kids that too, it's very challenging, but it's it's amazing when you start to see kiddos connect with that, especially kids who have ADHD or autism or sensory processing disorder, or even just our typical self, just taking a moment to stop and think and do like a body check, like a body scan, and say, okay, how am I feeling right now? And what do I need to make sure I'm kind of in that, what we call the just right zone? Like how can I get to that functioning zone? And you're right. Sometimes as a parent, as a teacher, as a professional, we're go, go, go. And you're thinking, I had to use the bathroom an hour ago, or I haven't even eaten enough today, and we're not taking care of ourselves, or I really need to go and do some quiet time, some meditation, or, just being alone and quiet. That's really a great thing for kids too. They need that quiet time. So even when kids aren't done napping, I encourage families to have them do some quiet reading time or something, because it's important for even kids to have that, even though they don't quite understand, oh, I'm needing this because it helps my body.
Yeah, no, that reminds me of, I had a day home for many years, and every day we had quiet time. That was it. Like everybody got to go to their own space. Like we separated so that we could, and it was like, sleep if you want, read a book if you want. I don't care what you do. You can even play quietly, but this is quiet time for an hour.
Right.
And if I ever didn't have quiet time, the afternoon was just chaos. Like we were always butting heads. People, like, we didn't get along. It was not good. And so it was like this, you can do whatever you want, but it has to be alone.
Yes.
By yourself, without any extra stimulus, and just
no
enjoy.
Times, not TV.
Nope.
None of that stuff. Yes.
Yeah. And it was what saved us pretty much every day, because we're busy and playing in the morning, and then it was usually right after lunch. We'd have lunch, and then it was like, okay, it's quiet time.
Right.
And then we were all fine to get back together.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah. So what are some other ways, okay, now that you've kind of talked about this, the systems, what are some ways that parents and educators can become aware of how the environment is impacting kiddos on a sensory basis?
Yeah, I love this question because everybody is different. So some people explain themselves as like an outgoing personality or more of like a shy, reserved personality, but sometimes that is actually how we perceive our environment. And I perceive myself as an outgoing kind of bubbly personality, but I also really like my quiet downtime too. So everybody has a little bit different way they process the sensory environment. So think about your external things first. So in a classroom, when you're teaching kids, you want to display their art and you have all these cute things on the wall, but think about less is better, less is more. And some people are very organized and some people are a little bit more clutter and messy, but typically in a learning environment and even in our homes, we do better when things have a place, when things are organized. And so that can be a challenge for adults sometimes, but that's really good for our kiddos to be able to see that okay, this is where this goes. These are where my shoes go. When I come in the house, I take them off. The countertop may have a pile of mail, but that needs to get put away and moved and organized within 24 hours or something. And your kids are going to have toys out and that kind of thing, but put them away and teach your kids how to put things back where they go, because when we have so much visual clutter, then you also are then going to have more noise and more active. And I am not talking about a quiet, sterile house at all. I'm talking about you have kids and you're playing and it's fun, and that's totally fine. But then you transition into a next part of your day, whether you're going to an activity, you're going to have lunch and nap time, then you need to kind of lower the lights, lower the volume a little bit, clean up some of that visual stuff. Same thing with classrooms. When kiddos are coming in and it's kind of the afternoon and we've had a busy morning, think about just even turning off the lights and playing some calming music. So then you have something that's, kind of that calming auditory. Those are just some simple ways to think about how we can change the external environment so that then internally we can start to regulate.
Love it. Thank you. Yeah, often it's, we notice this, but sometimes we don't notice it with our thinking brain. We just notice it with our feeling selves, right? And we go into a space, and some spaces just feel really good.
Yes.
And we're not aware why, it just feels good. And so I find, actually, one hint that I have for people, especially for the visual clutter, is to take a picture of whatever space that you tend to live in. Okay, it might be your office or your living room or your kitchen or your classroom, whatever. And when, for some reason, when you look at a picture of it, you can actually see the clutter. Whereas when you're in it, sometimes you're, you're blind to the clutter. And
yes,
so that's,
I love that. That's a great idea. And I'll admit right now we're in transition in my house. We decided to move. My son is 17 months and we've moved him upstairs to his room, and we are moved the office down where I am right now. And it is not done. So even right now, as I'm talking to you about visual clutter, I have some things that are not complete in my bookcase and I can see them. And so I feel a little more anxiety and stress about that. So it's just something that's like, okay, we're in transition. By Friday, I'm going to have it all done. That's my goal. So that this weekend I can go into the weekend a little more regulated, because I know that I function much better when I don't see a pile of books over here that need to go in the bookcase.
well, and that's just it, right? And there are those waves to life. Like sometimes we get really busy. I know when I'm like right now is a busy season for me. I've got lots of conferences and teacher trainings and classes going on all at the same time. And so I tend to just kind of arrive home and dump. And I arrive home and I dump, and I arrive home and I dump. And I will admit that my office floor is a lovely maze right now, but it won't always be, right? I will set aside some time after this season to go in and put everything away and sort it out and that kind of thing. And I think that is perfectly normal for
Yes,
people
absolutely.
to kind of highs and lows and clutter and then declutter and clutter and declutter. It's an ongoing process. It's never a finished project.
And think about with kids. I can't tell you how many times I go into a kid's desk and I open his desk and I'm like, the teachers will be like, okay, it's clean out time. Well, sometimes the kids don't even know how to do that. They don't know. It's like executive functioning is a big other, topic that we talk about a lot. And kids who have problems just kind of seeing the big picture and then breaking it down into steps. Like, how do I do that? And that's another part of sensory processing and mindfulness and being aware of your environment and all of those things. So teaching kids even the simplest thing on like how to organize your papers. You've got those kids whose papers are just all in their folders all over the place. And getting them to understand, like, this is important. We want to be able to see this and read this, or you've got to turn this in and it can't be crumpled up. Your teacher's not going to be able to read your good work. So just giving our kids those tools even early on of how to just kind of organize, because they're going to function better when they open their desk if it's semi-organized and not chaos.
All over the place. All right. Moving on, you have this lovely concept, and I really like how you work with this, but you say sensory versus behaviors. Okay. Explain that a little bit for us. Kind of unpack that term.
Okay, so there's actually like several books that out there that are like sensory versus behavior, and I think a lot of people in our field talk about this. Behavior specialists, psychologists, occupational therapists, etc. And the way I kind of describe this when I'm teaching parents or when I'm doing conferences and talking to families and stuff and teachers as well, is that you might see the behavior. So you have a kid who's acting out, you have a kid who's being defiant or throwing a temper tantrum or just shutting down, and you see that physical behavior. And in the moment, sometimes even myself as a parent, I'm like, okay, like you're not listening, you're not following directions, or, this needs to happen. But you've got to go back and think about what is the anecdote to that behavior? What is the A? So we talk about ABCs. The behavior is the B, the C is that consequence, because sometimes there is a consequence, a timeout, a break, taking away something, etc., losing a privilege. But what is that A, and what is that that's causing that behavior? So if you look at, okay, we've had a long week, we've traveled, we've been moving things in our house, we had a lot of bad weather, we haven't been outside. So what is that overall looking at? How are we processing our sensory abilities to function in that kind of, regulation piece? And what is possibly causing that? Now, it might just be your 3-year-old telling you no because they're 3 and they're telling you no. And that is a lot of the times, okay, well, then we have a consequence. But sometimes you have to look at a situation, and my husband and I do a good job of checks and balances with our 3-year-old and say, okay, hang on a second. I know that this behavior is not accepted, and we do need to have some sort of consequence, but let's look at what the cause is. Did we get enough sleep? Did we eat enough protein the past couple of days? Those kind of things. And actually, like, it's been really rainy here and today's sunny. So I already was like, okay, guys, it's cold, but we're bundling up. We're going outside. You guys are going to get some vitamin D, because that makes a huge difference. If you look at, and even as a teacher, it's also hard to know because you've got a classroom full of kids and you're seeing, one kid acting out or is not being respectful, or you've got girls chatting in the back and they're not listening. Stop and think, okay, what can I look at? How can I look at maybe that particular student? And I still maybe need to give a consequence, but don't take away things like recess. They need that movement. They need that activity, right? I mean, please don't take away recess. Like, do something different, or have them, have to do something extra, or help you with like cleaning, reorganize the desk, do those kind of things. Because I can guarantee you most of the time when kids are acting out, it's because they need more movement.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. I did a little celebration here. People might not have been able to see it, but when you said don't take away the reasons, I'm like, yes,
I know.
exactly.
It's an
Please.
easy fix. It is. And I've worked in schools and I've worked with teachers, and I try to come up with other solutions for them. And they're grateful, because sometimes in the moment you're like, that's all I know what to do. But when you can give other solutions, and teachers are like, okay, great. Let's try something different. And many times it's like, okay, you may even have lost the first 5 minutes of recess and then you can still go or something. But I really try not to take away recess from kids at all.
Yeah. All right. So moving into, how does yoga and mindfulness foster sensory integration?
Yeah, I love this. Is so great. And it's just, I love that we're talking about this, because it means that people are asking about it and people are looking at, how can I do this with my kids? I mean, I actually had a mom the other day text me and she said, do you know of like a mom and me yoga class for my, 2-year-old? I'm like, yes, that's awesome. I love that you're asking these questions. So if you yourself practice yoga, then you know the benefits. And probably most of your listeners are familiar with yoga and how much that can be so great for us. And think about how regulating that can be. And how do you feel after yoga? So your yoga can be very calming and relaxing. It can be energizing. You could be a little bit sore, but the good kind of sore. You also have done and moved your bodies in ways that you don't typically do. Think about, in a day-to-day, how many times you actually invert yourself. How many times you might squat and bend over, you might bend over to tie your shoes, but think about the vestibular system and how you're doing things like downward dog and moving through your sun salutations and being able to, move your body through space in a fluid movement. Now, you're going to think, my kid's not going to do that. My kid's not going to do the yoga that I know, right? Like, how am I going to get a kid, a young kid? I mean, maybe your older middle school kids. I mean, yeah, or even like my fifth graders were really good at this. But when they're younger, they're going to do a couple of poses. You're supposed to make it fun. It can be silly and it can be fun. It doesn't have to be this, very calm, quiet thing. But then you also can then move them into more calming, quiet poses and positions. But still, even just getting a kid to invert and either do a forward bend or their version of a downward dog, and even just getting them to come down into child's pose and trying to do some cat cow, that all of those things are going to be so great for regulating them. And you can do this even just a few minutes. It doesn't have to be this hour-long specific yoga piece, because that's going to be hard for little kids to sit and do that for that long. But even with some of the sequences I have in the book, I was going to just pull out this one calming sequence, and it's for kids who get over responsive to things. And a lot of that, I start with like breathing and breath and how amazing, and teaching kids how to breathe is so important. And that's so much part of like mindfulness and mindful life, and so much of that too. And then how do you get them to move through poses? So obviously they can be imitating you and you can be gently helping them. If you're not a yoga instructor, I always tell people to make sure that you're familiar with yoga and that you're being cautious of kids. If they have a physical disability, seek out external help. If they have any sort of medical condition, seizures, heart stuff, all of those things, obviously just be very cautious and making sure you're talking with their doctors and their therapists. But as a parent, even, you can go through and move through yoga positions with your kiddo, and don't force them into anything that they can't do or that it's too hard for them to do. But then just, getting them to even just stand in mountain pose and just be still for a moment, even if that's 10 seconds. And then the next time, maybe it's 15, and slowly increasing from there, kind of thing. So those are some ways to think about how you can look at yoga from a kid's perspective.
Love it. So jumping into like a classroom, okay? So you're a classroom teacher or you're administrator, and how can you work to make the school a more sensory sensitive environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that schools are starting to learn more and more about. And many schools have an OT on their staff. Or they've got an OT that comes through part-time through the school district. And even some private schools do too, and preschools. I mean, I work in preschools too, but I'll tell you, until you know, you don't know. So until someone educates you on how and you may have, as a teacher or as a professional, thought, oh yeah, like I see these things, but I didn't know what to call it, or I didn't know how to describe it. And so giving that terminology and that education to administrators, principals, teachers, staff, the librarian, the gym teacher, to understand that there's so much that goes on in our bodies. And that when we're talking about sensory processing and sensory integration, that this affects everything that we do as kids and as adults, and how we can introduce that more and more. So I love teaching to schools and going in and doing trainings, because it's just, you see this aha, the teachers are like, oh my gosh, I just didn't know how to describe that, or then I didn't know what to do about it. Like, how do I then take this and move forward? So many times it's as simple as education and being able to teach the teachers and the staff again. And then the second part is just getting people to understand, as parents, advocate for your kids too. Advocate for your own kids and your own kids' needs and what they need in the schools and in the classrooms. And a lot of the times teachers think, I don't have enough time. I don't have another minute in my day for you to add something onto my plate. Well, guess what? I'm going to add 2 or 3 minutes to your morning and 2 or 3 minutes to your afternoon, which is actually going to save you time in the long run, because I'm going to help you with your classroom regulation. So just talking about having some mindfulness, doing some desk yoga, and sometimes schools don't want to call it yoga. So we can call it sensory movement. You can call it mindfulness. You can call it, Dr. Kristen Race has an amazing program called Mindful Life, and that's awesome. And that she does a lot of school teachings and stuff too, because some people don't want to call it yoga, and that's totally fine. We did where I worked and it was great, but giving them those tools to be able to do, just chair push-ups, just stretching those muscles, and just even like reaching up and stretching and like taking, take deep breaths and taking kind of like a mental break from classroom. It's quick, it's easy, and then move on with your day. And you will have less distraction and less stress as you get the kids more regulated in the classroom.
Yeah, love it. Love it. You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, I know.
I'm singing it loud and strong, baby.
Yeah.
All right. Can you tell people where they can find more information about you, where they can get in touch with you, and where they can access your lovely books?
Yes, absolutely. So my website is sensoryparenting.com. You can also go to sensoryyogaforkids.com. It'll take you to the same place. All of my books are on there. We also have our books on Amazon. A lot of them are in Barnes and Nobles across the country. It just depends on where you are. And you can email me or call me and contact me through my website.
Awesome. And of course, you're on social media and you do all of that kind of stuff.
Yes. And my Facebook page is Britt E. Collins. So you can also, and I have a sensory parenting Facebook page as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There is so much we didn't get to, just for the listeners. Like, there's a whole feeding side of things. I think we need to have like an episode on that.
Yes,
so that'll be a teaser
awesome.
for things to come. I'll add you to the list. Really interesting topics. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Britt. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad that we could connect across the many miles. I love technology, and all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today, guys. This has been Donna Freeman with the Yoga in My School podcast, where we empower you to explore mindfulness and movement with youth. If someone you know has come to mind while you've been listening or watching today, please share this episode with them. And that way, more people can know about sensory processing and integration and how we can live regulated and help others be regulated in our world. All right. Thanks so much, you guys. Namaste.